There is an inherent difficulty in adapting stories between storytelling mediums, and although it is not directly apparent, there are reasons why most medium transfers fail. There are reasons that almost no film adaptation of a video game is successful, and vice versa. The reason is not because the material does not stay faithful to its source, in fact quite the opposite. When art tries to stay completely faithful to its source, refusing to address the changes between mediums, is when many complications occur, with audience resonance and emotional connection. This is quite common in musical theater adaptations from stage to screen as well. For every success, there are many failures. One of the largest stage-to-screen successes is the 2007 film adaptation of Stephen Sondheim's Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, began its storied past as a character in the Victorian penny dreadful story The String of Pearls, written by James Malcolm Rymer. The story of a barber who slaughters his victims and puts them into pies was an urban legend throughout London for years. Many believe these stories to be true, despite there being no historical connection to this at all. In 1973, English playwright Christopher Bond took this story of a murderous barber and added depth by giving the man a tragic backstory with great influence from the Count of Monte Cristo. There was one man who saw this play by the name of Stephen Sondheim, and he saw potential in musicalizing this story. Stephen Sondheim and Hugh Wheeler collaborated with director Hal Prince to adapt Christopher Bond's play into a musical. The show opened on Broadway in March of 1979. While the show is not immediately popular with audiences, musical history has been kind to the show, praising it as one of the most compelling and controversial musicals to ever be on a Broadway stage. One of the people who was inspired by this musical was an up-and-coming artist from Cal Arts named Tim Burton, who would later adapt the musical into a film. Many film and theater critics regard Tim Burton's 2007 film adaptation of Stephen Sondheim's Sweeney Todd as one of the very few films that beautifully holds its own as a film while still being an adaptation of a stage musical, including Stephen Sondheim himself. This Sondheim seal of approval is not because the film had a religious devotion to not altering the original text, quite the contrary. It's because the adaptation recognized that a film is a completely different medium than a Broadway stage, and changes need to be made to accommodate this. However, in both the film and stage musical, there is one song, entitled Epiphany, which is an interesting segment to analyze the aesthetic difference between an adaptation of stage to screen. Composer Stephen Sondheim describes this song musically and narratively as...
And what I did was I took his motifs and the Dies Irae, and I mixed them together into kind of a nightmare piece. The major point of this number is that the mood changes constantly, that you're watching a man's mind crack.
This description of the song as a nightmare piece is essential in the execution of the song. It is neither completely in the head of our main character, nor completely a dream sequence. It's the blurred line between reality and insanity that must be blurred for the audience, as well as Sweeney Todd himself. In the stage musical, the anti-hero Sweeney Todd sings of revenge and anguish as the musical cacophony builds up slowly throughout the song until the fourth wall is broken completely and he turns his anger and vengeance away from the characters in his narrative and directs it to the audience, threatening the lives of the innocent spectators. This is a beautiful and theatrical way to interpret the death knell of a character's sanity. However, that being said, something like this would be very hard to do in a film, due to strong boundaries between the audience and the performers. In the film adaptation, the music builds up with each measure until Todd reaches the point where in the original stage production, the fourth wall is broken. At that point, a new reality is created inside the head of our lead. He appears on a London street full of people who seem to be completely unaware of the demon barber's blatant threat to their lives. Through 2.5 minutes of song, the music has reached a fever pitch where a new reality is created in the mind of an insane man, reaching an equally insane conclusion. Everyone is awful, and everyone deserves to die. This change, while drastic and completely novel to the original, still continues to keep the true to Stephen Sondheim's original intention, to have a nightmare piece. Todd is having a waking nightmare that he can walk through and influence. This is a scene that could only ever work being put to music. The cinematic theatricality of it would seem out of place unless a man was singing his heart out. The topic itself is too absolute that it almost would be unconvincing for a performer to simply say in a monotonous spoken dialogue, "They all deserve to die." It would only undersell the absolution of the statement. The perfect mix of non-diegetic music and lyrics and a reality that takes place outside the film's physical diegesis is the only way a segment like this can be told in an emotionally satisfying way. In this scene, there is no doubt in any audience member's mind that they are indeed watching a film. However, the lack of realism in relation to the film doesn't take away from the emotional connection to the story. It's quite the reverse, in fact. The sensations are elevated. The feelings in the scene are so high that words cannot do them justice, and the actions taking place are so drastic that a believable reality would simply underwhelm. They have to sing. Sweeney Todd, being one of the most successful stage-to-screen adaptations of all time, shows that changes are necessary, but it's always important to remain true to an artist's original intent when creating the material. Both Tim Burton and Stephen Sondheim respect and embrace the original material while accepting that changes are necessary, which is the reason why films like Sweeney Todd are more emotionally stylistically resonating compared to things as the Phantom of the Opera adaptation or the Les Miserables film adaptation, which are faithful to the original film to a fault. What does this information say about upcoming filmed stage-to-screen adaptations? Try to acknowledge your medium transfer while staying faithful to the intent of the original artists.